Well, welcome back to Brass Tactics. This is kind of a soft relaunch of the podcast. We took it offline for a little bit, trying to think about the best format for reaching our audience and trying to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And what we want to accomplish is literally we want to take some bigger concepts, some of these fun buzzwords that get thrown around in the news and in reports and in news reports about these reports, and literally just strip them down to their brass tactics. So to do that, we're gonna try to come back to a weekly format. We're gonna stick to stuff that you see in the news, and we're going to just sort of aim for interpreting stuff into simpler terms, so as well as providing our own sort of insights. And if you want to let us know what you think, we've got Instagram, Brass Tacticast, and we have an X, or you can just comment on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you're listening to this. Now, for today, unfortunately, we are down a man, but I have the eponymous Peter Maverick Mitchell with me, as always.
I wouldn't let you do it without me.
And unfortunately, his wingman, Goose Rooster Matthew Goose Rooster Goose Dorizio, was unable to make it tonight. So,
Fortunately, you're family to me, Joe. So I owe you. I always put you up top.
oh, thanks, Pete. And you are that weird uncle to us over here as well.
Oh,
If you don't
gotta
laugh,
start
people
somewhere.
think I'm just being mean.
Blah, blah, blah. No, don't bully me, Joe. Stop bullying me, Joe. You hear that, Mom McGiffin?
So, at any rate,
Welcome back to Brass Tactics. Now,
because when my mother-in-law met you, she said, I always thought Joe was kind of a little bit harsh to Pete on the show, but then I met Pete, and I kind of understand now.
I don't like that. I don't like that one bit. That's why I can't let people. You never meet your heroes.
Never meet your heroes.
Never meet your podcast hosts.
And never meet the people who write reports about your national defense strategy either.
I wouldn't want to either.
Switching over to sort of the soup du jour or soup du week.
It's a soup sandwich.
There's a few different things in the news. We're kind of banking on, well, that there was that really cool strike that Israel pulled off against that Hamas leader inside of Iran using a smart munition that was allegedly outside of Iranian airspace, from a drone outside of Iranian airspace. I don't know if you saw that, Pete.
They got the Hezbollah third in command, the chief of staff too, is a twofer.
Yeah. You think the Zawahiri thing would have put insurgents on notice that there are some really clever munitions out there that minimize
Saying there's an
collateral
Iranian
damage.
air defense commander out there who's having a really bad day.
I cannot even imagine. So, sort of banking on this whole conflict in the Middle East, holding for another week, we went with the alternative hot topic this week, which was the RAND Research and Development, a think tank which is commissioned or part of the commission every 4 years, I think, to review the United States national security posture, specifically the National Defense Strategy. The National Defense Strategy is generally updated about every 4 years. Sometimes an administration will come in and keep the previous one, but more often or not, you get one strategy per executive
and it happened in the middle of
right?
the administration. So it was 2022 was the last one. Before that, it was 2018.
Yeah. President Biden did break the mold a little bit, and when he first entered office, he almost immediately published an interim strategy, and it was sort of like a half strategy, but it conveyed a very clear intent, taking us away from the previous. Was it 2018? The last 2018 was President Trump's last strategy, I think it was. So generally every 4 years, give or take. Now, what's interesting about this defense report, is that it looks at the strategy and it looks at the environment, and it's supposed to gauge whether or not the United States is moving in a good direction. According to this report, the United States is not moving in this direction, which is why I came up with a really clever title for this one, Pete. I don't know
it's
if you
very
saw
clever,
that.
Joe.
national defunct
Mm.
strategy.
Well, and according to the commission, who is commissioned by Congress, but it's handled by the Rand Corporation, the very famous think tank. Uh, they say this is the worst case they have seen since 2011, like a largest disconnect between the threats facing the United States and the national defense strategy's ability to deal with those threats. Unacceptable risk.
Yeah,
That would be
and
the business lingo for
yeah,
that.
I've actually pulled out some weapons. We do encourage you all, if you're interested to learn more, don't just take our word for it. Definitely go read the report. It is available publicly and for free from Rand's website. And there's a whole bunch of different news outlets that have sort of taken their own reactionary
Yeah,
spins on
better
it.
when you actually read the whole
Uh,
thing, you realize it's not as splashy. It's only 135 pages, and most of that is like credits and footnotes. So you can read the whole thing in less than an hour.
And yeah, I mean, I really don't think people need to make it past the summary
Yeah,
even,
unless
because
they're interested in like a
summaries literally
particular
just puts
section, but
everything
yeah, the
up
summary
front.
is completely fine. The summary is only a page and a half.
Yeah, there's not much need for most people to get
Yep.
into the data. Um, but yeah, so this might alarm some people who are just reading it. For Pete and I, there wasn't really anything groundbreaking in here, and I'm going to break the mold a little bit here, Pete. I'm going to give my background for biographical data only. This is something we've avoided mostly because we don't want where we work or what we do or our current occupations to necessarily color any part of this conversation. But I can appreciate that maybe you all listening, knowing a little bit about our minimal expertise, uh, might make things a little bit more palatable, might make you a little bit more comfortable to sort of talk about some of these topics at the water cooler. Because national defense should matter to everybody, regardless of what your stance is. So I'm going to give my introduction, and I'm going to let Pete say his parts. But I am an Army officer by trade, although I do plan to leave service in the next year or so and take what I've learned back to the private sector and help make America safer out that way. But I was a logistician, and most recently, I have been an instructor at West Point, and I am also on staff at the Modern War Institute, which is a sort of mini think tank office inside of the United States Military Academy at West Point. And then, as my side hustle, I daylight as a instructor at West Point in the Defense and Strategic Studies program. And again, I say all of this just for biographical data only. I do want to underline that nothing I say is representative of the Defense and Strategic Studies program or of any other entity at West Point. They are solely my own opinions.
But they're such wonderful opinions. Very good. You could
Yeah,
take
I
these
think
opinions to
I
the
think
bank,
they're great.
except when he
You
disagrees with
can.
me. But that's all right though. That's all high theater and
I
comedy.
am not sure what the bank would give you for them, but you could certainly try to take my opinions to the bank.
So between us, what do we have? A combined 24, 25 years actually military experience
You have that many?
combined.
Or are you 12,
Yeah,
13?
I'm
What are you,
13 then.
13
Yeah,
years? Yeah. 20, so
yeah,
technically
it's a
like
lot.
23,
It's a lot
24.
of combined experience. You
We have nearly a quarter
a
of a
bit of
century of military
yes,
expertise.
just not at the strategic level.
Oh, but Pete, do you want to give your biographical data real
Yeah,
quick
yeah.
or
Just like
whatever you want
Joe,
to
I'm an
share?
Army officer. I'm a major currently, air defense officer, also instructor at West Point in the Strategic Studies Department. That's how we actually ended up meeting and starting this podcast. Again, ditto for Joe, the necessary disclaimers. I also write quite a bit for both the Modern War Institute and other places on strategy and policy, with the appropriate disclaimers, of course.
Samesies. Although Pete's being a little bit modest, I kind of write a little bit more general. I like military theory. I like those dusty old books. If that's not evident from the last 16 episodes or not. Pete's being a little modest, though. He is fairly widely read in Russia. His expertise leans very heavily towards the air defense, and Russia has not appreciated some of the things that he's opined on in terms of their cool hypersonics and their Kinzhal rocket
Oh
and
yeah, the
some other
Kinsville
stuff.
article that
So
did have a hit piece on me, so that is pretty sweet.
Pete's
I
out
got
there.
noticed. I got noticed, but that's that's whatever. Any publicity is good publicity, I guess. Yeah,
One
yes.
can hope.
Hopefully, some of those Kremlin frickin' shills can end up on this podcast channel. Please. We also will accept ruples.
Mhm.
Actually, no, we can't. We can't accept that. You can't cash them. Never mind. We'll take Ewan. Make sure it's clean Ewan.
I thought Dogecoin was what you wanted.
Dogecoin? No,
I
man,
thought
no,
you were
no,
all
no.
about
Because
that
Trump just
crypto these
spoke at the.
days. But
No, no, no.
anyway,
I'm bullish on
so
Bitcoin
that's
now
us. That's our
because
biographical
Trump
data. And
spoke at
again, anything we
the
discuss
World
on this
Bitcoin
podcast is, in
Conference
fact,
in
our
Nashville.
opinions and does not reflect the opinions of anybody we work for or with. They are solely and exclusively our own. Pete, are you back? Because you froze up
I
real
had a
good.
horrible lag spike. You just spoke like Alvin the Chipmunk for about 5 seconds across my screen.
That's wild. Okay. Well, anyway, so moving on to discuss this defense review. So I think Pete's and I's biggest takeaway, at least, is we definitely agree that there's no reason to really be alarmed by this report, even though this report presents itself as sounding an
Mm-hmm.
alarm bell, because these are all known shortcomings that smart folks and other folks have been working on for quite some time. That being said, in this sort of limited format, we're going to spend the next 15 minutes or so kind of going through our highlights and giving
Yeah.
our own thoughts about it. So the biggest takeaway was this defense review is sitting and it's saying you've got China on one side, Russia on the other. China's getting crazy invested and definitely outpaces us in the West Pacific. There's no way that we could keep up with China. There's certainly no way we could keep up with China and Russia at the same time. And there's a whole bunch of assumptions that are wrapped up into this. But long story short, we kind of already knew that, and frankly, no amount of defense spending is ever going to make the U.S. capable of fighting China, Russia, and also trying to contend with rogue states like Iran and North
Agreed.
Korea at the same time.
If you
There's
were to
just
take their suggestions at face value and implement all their changes, it would essentially try to put the United States on a war footing when there's no war going on, which never happens in history unless you're actually preparing to start a war imminently.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's one of the biggest things I wrote down. But yeah, so the overall, and then its alternative proposal is that you kind of offset the costs to the U.S. directly by building more partnerships with partners and allies and building out coalitions, which is kind of like a no fooling kind of thing. They point to AUKUS as being widely successful, right? AUKUS is this relatively new, a few years old now, Australia, UK, US agreement to sort of base nuclear submarines out of Australia, as well as trade some secret squirrel type technologies and other things in order to
How
benefit
many
mutual
Virginias did
defense.
we agree to
And
build for the Australians? 12, I think.
was
8 to
yeah,
12. That's
it was eight
yeah.
to 12. I
So
can't
again, that is
remember.
not terribly impressive, right? Because how many Virginia class submarines does the United States Navy have, right? Well, how many attack
No,
subs?
but I mean it's eight to
Yeah.
12 more that'll be parked right off of China's
Yeah.
doorstep. And then on top of that, because Australia's own legal code does not allow them to do
Mm-hmm.
anything nuclear, these will be American bases with American nuclear maintenance, nuclear energy, nuclear everything
Gotcha. My bad.
facilities.
Yeah. So my bad. It was
So,
5. It's actually 5, including
oh,
they're also going to acquire 3 Virginia classes. So they're going to get in total of 8. So I was right about the 8 number. They're going to build 5 themselves.
okay. I
Yeah.
had remembered
So
eight
the
as
U.S.
well
has
somewhere.
44 attack subs, mixture of
So they'll have 8 nuclear-powered submarines, and the advantage of these nuclear submarines is that they can stay down. They're not
yes,
like diesel submarines; they don't require oxygen in order to combust
yes,
fuel in order to move. So they are just
and they
extremely
can use
stealthy.
U.S. Mark 48 torpedoes, which are the best on the planet, most likely. I mean, according to what we know about torpedo technology, way better than whatever the French have.
And because Australia, by law, does not use nuclear anything, This has also required American basing facilities in order to service the nuclear reactors on these
Correct.
submarines, among other
Correct.
things. So it's a very heavily involved thing. And then the report saying we need more things like this, and that's kind of like a slap the forehead moment, like, oh really? Like, yes, we need more things like this. That's why we did that to
Cool.
begin with. So a lot of these things that they call for, other folks have identified. Some of this
But
stuff
the
is
thing is,
just
here's the thing. AUKUS was
unrealistic.
great. Great job. AUKUS was, what, 6 years ago? 5 years ago? Pretty sure it was during the Trump administration when it got hashed out. Uh, Things that are of greater concern is Australia's economy, not that big. Countries,
No, I think because I was just starting school when it happened, so I want to say it
oh,
was
is it
like 20. Well, geez, that was still 4 years ago, I guess. It was right around
2020? So
2020. It was,
turnover between Trump and Biden was
yeah, it
big.
was, yeah, sometime
So,
pandemic
so
time.
bigger problem besides AUKUS being great is the fact that the Germans are still not remilitarizing, and the Japanese are still reticent about deploying military forces. Those are the two big ones that we need as allies and partners. Everybody else is kind of extra, if you're really being honest about this. So that is a non-starter because how are you going to force the Germans and the Japanese to just kind of peel off 80 years of being told they shouldn't be able to use their militaries? And oh wait, sorry guys, we need you again. So sorry about that whole World War II thing. There's a bigger threat now, and the U.S. needs help with it.
Yeah, and to the report's credit, it does try to lean into like NATO, a large, arguably the most successful coalition bloc of all time, and other things. But like ultimately, like Pete's saying, you're you're up against a finite boundary of what you can obtain through this partnership sort of approach. And so at that point, you need to start looking elsewhere. But for the
Yeah.
interest of time,
Yeah.
Pete, I've got a few different quotations. I'm
Yep.
just
Yep.
going to
Yep.
go through line that I pulled. So the first little clip I pulled is from the reporters. China and Russia's No Limits partnership, formed in February 22, just days before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has only deepened and broadened to include a military and economic partnership with Iran and North Korea, each of which presents its own significant threat to U.S. interests. This alignment of nations opposed to U.S. interests creates a real risk, if not likelihood, that conflict anywhere could become a multi-theater or global war. So to fight them, coercing their neighbors need to use all elements of national power to fight this. Yeah.
Again, that's not a
Uh,
new thing.
so
People
like
have been
long
saying
story
we need to
short,
not just use the military for what 30 years at least. Like, oh yeah, hey, we have a State Department.
yeah. And again, it is pointing out America large in some aspects, especially when you're talking global, right? Because NATO is not a globally focused alliance, at least not yet. Uh, America largely stands alone as this former former superpower slash current lead leader state of the world order as we know it, and so America has fingers in every pie, and just like the British Empire towards the end of its era, like we cannot be
Mm-hmm.
everywhere at once. This is known. There's nothing we can do that would create this. So this has been a real risk, and this has been a real risk. This was arguably still even a risk during the Cold War, although the USSR was at least more of a single centralized entity, as it
Well,
were.
no, because because I would counter with the fact that communism was a global was a global philosophy and ideology, which allowed it to infiltrate and move around in ways that,
Yeah, I
and
suppose
also
that's fair.
coordinate in ways that the Chinese and the Russians they can't even do, let alone add on the North Koreans and the Iranians. There's no coordinated action happening between these four countries. All four of them, I mean, let's be honest. One of them is just trying to feed its people. The other one just had the Israelis bomb their guest in a high-rise hotel at their capital city. I mean, we'll see what happens, but the last time the Iranians tried to retaliate against the Israelis, they got humiliated on the national stage because not a
And Pete wrote an article about
I'll be,
that
I'll
too
be, I'll
on
be
Modern
completely
War
honest. I'm
Institute.
not afraid of the Iranians right now because the Israelis sure as heck aren't. You don't go up to a scary bear and poke him in the eye with a stick unless he's behind a very, very stout cage. And that is the way the Israelis are treating Tehran right now, and have been treating them for the last year and a half. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Ditto for the Russians, because the reports like, oh, the Russians are spending 29% of their GDP, their federal budget, on defense. Like,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
and they
I
are
had that
still
there too.
locked in a freaking death war against Ukraine, okay? With or without Western aid. They're locked into like a Korean War style attritional grind on a frontage that's larger than the US East Coast. Right? Like this is unbelievable. The Russians are trying to recuperate combat power. They're not going to be able to project it for at least a year and a half after this war's over. Unbelievable
Yeah.
stuff.
Percentages
They
are
don't
very,
mention the
very
numbers because they're trying to
relative.
manipulate you and trying to alarm you. China has increased its defense budget by 79% over year. That means nothing, right? It means absolutely nothing. And then on top of that, there's this wonderful line they have in there where it's like, we need to mobilize the American people so that they understand what they're at risk at losing if America loses its place as the preeminent world superpower.
Okay. All right. Well, that's one of the very few
It's
melodramatic points where
incredibly
I kind of
melodramatic.
do
Look at the
concur with
British.
them.
Like they fall from being an empire. Like their standard of living relatively went up from 1939 to 1950 because at least they weren't fighting the Nazis, right?
Yeah, that's true, but free trade and enterprise is a mainstay of the U.S. where China doesn't. But that's
Yeah.
towards the
Yeah.
end of the
All
report.
right.
Let's
All right.
put a
Shit.
pin. Let's put a
It's
pin in
just
that one.
silliness.
But yeah, so the crux of this matter is it's not Russia plus Iran plus North Korea. It's dealing with China, contending against China, and then at the same time potentially having to do these Cold War era brush fires, where, like Pete referenced, with communism popping up all over the world. We have these rogue states fomenting insurrections and unrest all over the world, and we probably cannot handle all of those things
That's
at the
what the
same time.
Europeans are
Uh,
supposed to be there for, right? Like the Poles are tripling
right.
the size of
So
their
this
army. Like,
this makes a bold assumption, one that America needs to react
mhm.
everywhere like it did through previous eras of history. But two, the other thing that it's not talking about with this solution of we need a whole of nation effort is that has to include private businesses. It has to
Mhm.
include private businesses. America's industry is private, right? And it alludes to World War II when it's talking about America's former industrial power. And frankly, there was a different sense of patriotism and belonging and national pride that's not necessarily there now because a lot of these industries are
They're
fairly
completely globalized.
globalized.
They make a suggestion later on of
And
increasing the corporate tax rate to pay for this increased military spending. These corporations will just move to Canada or anywhere else.
which is why you should just privatize the military, which is another proposal that is implied as a
Well,
solution in the
only for
report later.
acquisitions. Only for acquisitions. They don't go nearly. They don't dare to propose the
That's the
privatization of the
problem.
professional force.
Well,
They
right,
won't
but
slaughter that
well,
sacred
it's
cow.
the next bit. We're
Mhm.
about to get there, and then my favorite is this is the first time I've seen somebody like use the word Byzantine in full
Mhm.
sincerity, referring to our Byzantine research and development and procurement systems. Yeah, like again, like the military was already tracking. It points to all of these really cool new ways, like when we had our friend Sean come on and talk about the Defense
Mhm.
Innovation Unit and some other things, it points to those as being examples of what the DoD should do. And it says, but these are really small examples, and that does not speak for the rest. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, they were almost prototype entities. Like we wanted to make sure it could work before we put all the eggs in
Mhm.
one basket. But one thing that it does highlight is we are overly fond of our legacy
Well, it's because
platforms.
they're
Like
safe.
we need to let the tank go. The tank
No, he
needs
doesn't
to
say.
be
No,
let go.
they don't say that in the army section. They say this bizarre statement that the Ukraine war has proven that there is a need for massed heavy armored formations, which is a bit of a
It
non
did
sequitur
not.
because yes,
How did I miss
go to the
that?
U.S. Army section. It also makes the inane comment
Oh
that
my
land
god.
power is a key cornerstone of American security, despite the fact we're an island nation.
Well, you see, this is another problem. It ties back into this presupposed assumption that America needs an expeditionary
Yeah,
military still, something that it definitely became so
yeah.
heartsick
It
with
doesn't even
after the war
criticize
in
the Air Force
Afghanistan.
for developing a new manned stealth bomber, which like the B-21, which is
I'm
completely
still like,
insane when you think about the way technology is going. That's the last thing you want to be
when you think
developing.
about how you can just shoot stuff from your continent, just stealth your
Yeah,
missile, call it a day.
yeah,
I don't get it.
that's right.
But yeah, that was fun. Byzantine research and development. I highlighted that because that's a very charged word. There's no reason to use that word if you are just writing prosaic and trying to be
No, they aren't
objective.
though. And the thing is, the whole thing just comes across as silly because none of their suggestions are actually realistic. We're not going to raise the defense budget because we can't afford it. They're not going to raise taxes in an election year to pay for the increase in the defense budget because there is no direct threat. There is none.
No,
You cannot
and
scare people about the
on
People's Republic
like
of China. They're on the other side of the planet.
that's that's another
Yeah.
problem. That's another problem. That was another thing I highlighted. It's like it points to there's high retention rates right
Wait a minute.
now, but
Wait,
the
you just said
recruitment
you were
rates are
getting
down,
out,
and it's
man.
like
You're what about retent? You're defying their statement there.
I am, and I think part of the I I think that like they don't put much reasoning into why the retention rates are up, right? Like the job market isn't as great as it
Mm-hmm.
could be right now. There's a lot of job security in working for the military, but recruitment rates are down. We're an all volunteer force. If recruitment rates are down, that's generally indicative that people are not
Mm-hmm.
interested in fighting. So you probably should not plan to start wars that your people are not
If you're a
interested in
democracy, at
fighting
least.
if you're a democracy. If you're a democracy that does not believe in drafting. So like that doesn't make sense. You should probably be reinvesting those assets and looking for other
Mm-hmm.
ways to solve this problem. Again, we are managing to do our part in curtailing Russian aggression without actually putting boots on the ground
Mm-hmm.
right now. And so, again, a lot of this commission implies that the United States will need to be able to deploy, not just defend American soil, but to deploy large quantities of forces abroad. And that's not the only strategy you can take in order to secure your
Not
national
when you're
security
following their
interests.
advice and taking
It's
a whole of nation approach to defense.
it's a very
If you should be,
legacy and
if you're doing
dated
a whole
way
of
of
nation approach,
thinking.
we should be downsizing the Defense Department because we're then using all arms and tools of national power appropriately.
Yeah, and I definitely don't disagree that there needs to be a whole of nation, and I had that written down somewhere. So part of this reason that we can't achieve this whole of nation, like the commission does point out, that Congress needs to get involved. Congress has only been involved in really two significant instances. In 1947, when our National Security Act was published, that authorized the CIA, the National Security Council, and the National Security Administration, as well as creating like the Department of Defense the way we know it now with the Department of Air Force, Department of Army, Department of Navy. So that set the groundwork. And then in 1986, the Joint Force was revised because our Joint Force is not all that joint. They operated very, very autonomously up until that point, often getting our own people killed through almost sheer incompetence and lack of
Mm-hmm.
communication. So 1986 Goldwater Nichols Act fixed that a little bit. But the only conflict we rolled into right after that was right there in the 90s when we hit got involved in the Gulf War. And because that went off so
It proved
spectacularly,
everyone was right.
it it was just used as proof positive that there was no more need to make the joint force
Yeah.
more jointier. And so you still have a relatively independent army, navy, air force that are all responsible for their own administration. And then you have this extra structure on top that's meant to force them to work together once you need them to work together. And so you have a whole lot of inefficiencies in developing these new technologies that the Army, Air Force, and Navy would all need, like radios, communication, different AI applications, ways to process satellite imagery. Um, and so, yeah, like Congress probably needs to get
Mm-hmm.
involved in that. And in order to achieve a whole of nation effort, you should probably be able to certifiably achieve a whole of military effort first. But that's going to be tied into, again, 1947 and 1986 were very, very long times ago, and very, very different technologies and different
There's also no
Americas ago.
vision. That's the thing. If you want Congress to get involved, you need to have some politicians with vision who will start drafting a
Yeah,
plan.
and even before you get that, you literally need to start from
Mhm.
the drawing board and redesign a national military complex that is adequate and capable and optimized to operate digitally,
Yeah, not
frankly.
analog.
And so it goes well beyond just reviewing this single defense strategy and fixing our acquisition systems. It's something that just needs to take a really, really keen eye to. And now's probably a good time to start thinking about that, given that recruitment numbers don't seem to be going up
Except
anytime
for the
soon, you
Marines,
know?
they're good to
Like
go.
the
Year
Marines,
after year. How do they do it?
they've
Yep.
perfected marketing. Partly the whole CGI fighting dragons thing back when you and I were in
It's pure genius.
college. I don't know
Oh,
if you
absolutely.
remember that one.
Vividly remember that.
And partly reverse psychology. It's probably a good thing you didn't want to be a Marine. You probably couldn't
It's
hack it
insane.
anyways.
It's amazing to me how even with Marine 2030, which is the most again just innovative service, right? They are able to adapt quickly to change. Maybe because they actually have a high standard of discipline and IQ for their officers.
It also helps that they're the
Yes,
smallest. They're other than the Space
yes,
Force, they're the
and they
smallest
don't mind
entity
trimming
within the
fat.
Defense Department.
They're not overly attached to systems that are not of use to them. And even with all that change going on,
Raw.
they're able to still pull in recruits. Yes, yeah. And the army has to get the leftovers, just like back in when was McNamara's morons? Was that 1968? Or was that in the 70s?
I thought they were called
No,
whiz kids.
no. No, that was the special act to draft people whose IQ was like below 80 or something like that, and 99% of them went into the U.S. Army. Yep, a stunning appraisal of the service. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Oh man. All right, so my last point that I wanted to pull out, Pete, and then I'll pass it over to whatever else you wanted to pick on, is that the commission uh, levies some accusations against the U.S. defense industrial base. Basically, we're unable to meet the equipment, technology, and munition requirements of the United States and its partner allies in a protracted conflict. So, to be fair, our defense industrial base has never been able to do that at the start of any fight that America's ever picked or been
Correct. I
dragged
think their
into.
problem is that even a year or two after the war has started, aka the war in Ukraine's been going on for 2 years, we are still unable to ramp up to meet that demand because the industrial base no longer exists.
And
It's
this
all
is
been
part of the
outsourced.
problem, right? So when you go back to World War II, there was a significant amount of
Yes,
fungibility in
you could
things.
change a
Like
whatever, a Ford, sedan assembly line into making whatever, GM Jeeps, trucks, tanks, you name it. Anything.
airplane
Yes,
parts
it
too.
could work. Interchangeability. Nowadays,
Yeah. So there was
yeah,
fungibility
you
there. You
can't take
don't
a
have
freaking
that
Tesla
now.
plant
And
and
so,
tell it to start making Blackhawks.
or
No,
can
you
you?
can't.
Maybe that's maybe fungibility is something that needs to be
Yes,
invested in. And
that would
this
be
is this
3D
is why.
printing on a
Because,
vast scale, and it would be awesome.
well, maybe that's exactly where we need to go. Because if you look at it this way, Pete, right?
But that's
What? So
inefficient,
I'm
Joe.
not
That's the
saying they're
problem. That's
wrong.
inefficiency because post
No, 3D
no, 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 no,
printing
no.
is the is
No,
the
no, 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 because
epitome of
making a
efficiency.
giant vat-sized 3D printer that can make any part is going to be more inefficient to make, not to mention the R&D, than making a robot that only takes the wheel arch and puts it on a Honda Accord every single time, right? Like that's the atomization,
Then you need to figure out how to weaponize Honda
right?
Accords.
That's North
That's what I'm
African
saying.
militias. That's not that difficult. Just make sure it's a
Like,
Hilux.
I that's what I'm saying. But yeah, because this is the problem, right? Because they're not wrong. You need 155 rounds in order to have
Yeah, but we only
adequate
have
field
two
artillery
plants in the
support.
United States that can make them.
That's right. This is the problem. Because you need more 155 rounds when you start using
Mm-hmm.
155 rounds. And so what are you going to do? Make more plants? Because then if you have more plants and then you're anticipating the next fight, like this report is saying, now you need to
Yeah,
keep those plants
you need to
alive in some
subsidize them.
capacity
Yeah,
in order to make them. Well, what happens when you have a whole bunch of plants that you don't want to shut down and you want to keep them in operation in order to keep them from getting shut down?
you have what the Russians and the Chinese do, state-owned munitions firms that you just pay them to stay open. And there's a crap ton of corruption usually
Okay,
involved, but you can totally do that as long as you've
and
nationalized your defense
and
industry.
but when you're a democracy and people see all this money going there,
Oh,
then what
why are we
happens?
wasting all that money doing stuff that we don't actually need?
Which leaves you with two choices, right? One, you can shut down production like your people are voting to do, or two, find a reason to justify it to the people. Which, in the unfortunate case of things like munitions and defense
You
platforms,
might just have to start a war.
it sounds really funny and snarky the way we're phrasing it, but it is absolutely true. If you don't use it, then you will lose it, especially in a democracy. And so now you're going to use your military for clearly non military purposes in order to justify its size and composition. And the more weaponized your military is, well, especially when you're talking about munitions and expensive other things that require maintenance and factories to be upkept, then it's going to get explodey and more
Or you can
conflict
get
driven.
almost to the level of parody with the Japanese self-defense force, where they tell their constituents with a straight face the primary job of the Japanese self-defense force is humanitarian and disaster relief. And then it will show videos of Japanese helicopters picking people up from flooded rooftops and ships and stuff like that, and handing out MREs.
Well,
That's what our military is here for. We're here
if
for you.
that's
That's why we need our money.
if your military is adequately cross-trained, then that's
Yeah.
supposed viable. But that's why I'm saying the key is
Hmm.
fungibility. Because if your plant can only produce that 155 round, it's of no value in peacetime. And if it's of no value in peacetime, your peacetime loving citizens are going to be pretty annoyed that they're paying higher taxes in order to subsidize its existence when its existence, as far as they can see, is
But again,
supercilious
that's
in and of
so. Like I said,
itself.
the sophistication of modern weapons and technology is making it so that it's become non-fungible. You cannot just change things over like
Well,
that.
then maybe you should just privatize your military
Mm.
and then give your military license to find private ventures elsewhere, fight other people's
Until that
wars.
military decides that it would be more
This is
profitable to perhaps
yeah,
enact a
well,
change in management of its own country.
I mean, so maybe you limit sizes and stuff. So I do want to break the fourth wall here to say this is definitely getting for me being a little bit devil's
Hmm.
advocate-y, uh, because mercenaries as an export, while it sounds really cool, is probably going to end up extremely problematic at
Mercenaries
some
are
point.
always
Uh,
turning back home when they don't get paid.
as as ye old Wagner Group may or may not have indicated earlier in the
Oof, man, did you
Russia-Ukraine
see how they got
conflict.
scuffed up in Mali? By the way, yeah, they
Mm.
got. Anyways, I think they lost like 60 or 70
Yeah,
men
no,
in an
I
ambush.
saw the news there. People were claiming the
Yeah.
kill count of it. But anyway, yeah. But so the key is fungibility. If you can't make your defense industrial base relevant in peacetime, then you're going to do what we did when Secretary Gates was sitting and just have to start
Hmm.
axing everything. If there's no two ways about it. So, like I said, I don't want to disparage the report any further, uh, but it I don't want people to be as alarmed as this report is calling for, because the most alarming part I found about the report is how it was very it's very true that people really don't consider China an adversary or a threat to the United States like they
Hmm.
really ought. I don't think China's the boogeyman that's going to come for us like the USSR. But if China has its way, that is going to have a detrimental impact on everybody else's
But
quality of
here's
life,
the
for
the
sure.
$10 trillion question: is the detrimental effect on our way of life worth a war that even the Commission says would cost a minimum of 5% of global GDP and tens of thousands of lives at a minimum? That's just a simple blockade of Taiwan.
It also implies that the war and this is because I very much agree with Dr. Sean McFate
Mm-hmm.
on this one. The implication of China and America being in, we talked about this before, a
Yes, yes,
Thucydides
yeah.
trap
It's a false.
is
It's a false, and
it's
it's a
it's
false.
a
It's a
false
teleological
dichotomy.
explanation.
There's
Yeah.
cocktail tip right
False
there.
dichotomy. We
There's
must
a
be at
it's like
war
there it's not inevitable.
because
Yeah. It's not it's not an
I,
inevitability.
Graham Allison, who teach at Harvard, am going to oversimplify history and become very, very, very popular.
All right, let's lay off the ad hominem attacks just a skosh here, please. Uh, but because like realistically speaking, so we don't fight for every island against China when this war kicks off, right? Uh, think of how much China is going to have to exert in order to maintain the control it wants over the South China Sea, with all of those small states not going to appreciate their loss of
I
autonomy.
mean, I think it'll be.
China's barely holding its own internal integrity together.
I don't. We don't know that.
It,
We
it,
don't know that because it's essentially a closed book. We really don't know how things are going in China at all. And as Huntington would tell you immediately, it would be very easy for them to cow their neighbors with a sufficient show of force. Japan did not have revolutions running all around itself when it conquered all that stuff back in 1940 and 1941.
but for how long? Yeah, I mean that's not long enough, though.
Long enough to throw the Americans out of the region, and unless we had come back, they would have. I'm sure they would have put down very ruthlessly any rebellions.
No, it was long enough to throw us out of the region, but it's not long enough to impose oneself in order to have an undercurrent of insurgency
Yeah,
foment against you. That's
but
what I
here's the
was
thing: the
implying.
initial victory can be won without having to worry about it, and then now the ball's in the Americans' court. Do you want to come back at it, right? Like try to LARP as 1943 again and try to push them all the way back? Do we have the political will for
No,
that? Do we have the appetite?
I I don't think there's any because the the more China wants to exert beyond the South China Sea, right? The larger and larger a blue water
Mm-hmm.
force it's going to need, and then at some point, it's just going to be in an even worse position than we are, because the United States, at least for whatever you want to accuse its foreign policy machinations of, right? Uh, it 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 works by consensus with other states for the most part.
Yeah. That's because the alternatives are usually pretty terrible.
China forces consensus. So at a point where folks no longer feel like China can enforce consensus, you're going to see the power dynamics of that region shift very rapidly.
Good point.
Very rapidly. And so that's what I mean. It doesn't necessarily require an immediate solution, and thinking about things in terms of immediate solutions is why Japan lost.
Mm-hmm.
It's why we hemorrhage people every time we get into a major conflict.
Yep.
It's not a good strategy. It doesn't follow the tenets of Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, or anybody else we like to talk about. And and so maybe the report should be a little bit alarming. It's probably right. We probably should be devoting a little bit more money to our national defense industry, which would be a lot easier to do if you started investing in fungible applications. Like drones
Yep.
are very
Would you like me to
fungible.
share about what I believe will be the results from this commission?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
passing the
I
speaking straw
think
to you.
they'll talk about it until tomorrow, when the Iranians will attempt to attack the Israelis, probably tomorrow night after the funerals.
Oh,
And
there's no way. They got nothing left.
they have to do something. Will it work? I have my sincere doubts at this point, but I think probably the night of August the 1st.
I'm gonna call up Hezbollah and start
Yeah,
telling
please,
them to go
please,
do
just
something
do something,
dramatical.
please, like anything, like even like set off a firecracker in Netanyahu's shoe, please. Egg his house, put forks in his front yard.
Drop an upper decker in his toilet.
Yes, but yeah. Anyway, they're gonna say this. They're gonna say, "Oh no, China, horrible, horrible," and then something's gonna kick off in the Middle East this week, and all the talk in foreign policy would be, "Oh, how could this administration let this happen? Oh, we didn't support Israel enough. Yada yada yada." And the entire focus, again, not on China. The genius of this, right? Like the Chinese just need to sit back and wait. They have to because the Russians probably totally screwed their plans up for a peaceful annexation of Taiwan when they went into Ukraine and put the whole world on frickin'
Whoops.
alert. Thanks a lot, Vlad. But in the meantime,
America is weak because they finally left Afghanistan like we totally did
yeah,
20 years
in the
before
meantime,
that. It's time to make a
you have
move.
Ukraine, Armenia has calmed down, but that's all done. Gaza plus Lebanon now, and now Venezuela. You have now 4 hotspots popped up all around the world, and none of them in East Asia. So yeah, so the commission support is going to go up and it's going to come right back down again. And no one in Congress is going to be asking to increase defense spending. I don't think so. They'll be talking about more aid, less aid to Ukraine, whatever. But the Army's going to be the loser, as always. The Army's going to get probably the biggest cuts. No one's going to listen to their recommendations on the R&D or defense industry because it's going to break too many iron rice bowls. And we're going to keep just kind of bumbling along, like neither following what they say or changing anything specifically. That's what I think. The whole thing, as Lyndon Baines Johnson rather rudely put it, will just go off like a fart during a thunderstorm.
Yeah, so when Congress was last involved in 1986 in the Goldwater-Nichols Act, that bill was sponsored by 3 veterans. Just to give a frame of reference for what Pete's talking about. Like it took people who had felt the pain to get involved and take action in legislature. But yeah, so time will tell. Will this have done nothing? Will this at least be reflected in the next national defense strategy? I certainly hope so. But if nothing happens, all signs point to moving in the correct direction anyways, even if it's not as fast as this report has deemed necessary. But yeah, so it's a toss up about what we talk about next week, Pete. Talking about Venezuela should be fun because there's a big Iran piece there. They just literally made a statue of the Quds
Type.
Force commander in
Unbelievable, man. That's
January.
probably going to end up like the
Uh,
statues of Hugo Chavez, to be honest.
I wonder
It
if it's already been
probably
pulled
has been.
down.
It's a bad time to be a statue in Caracas right now.
Yeah, so maybe we just
More
talk Iran
importantly,
again because Iran
Nicolas
touches a little
Maduro
bit.
challenged Elon Musk to a fist fight, and Elon Musk accepted. So we might actually have a pay-per-view event as well to discuss next week. We'll see how fast that progresses. What a time to be alive.
Okay. I hope Elon Musk can
Taking
tag
Mark Zuckerberg?
Mike Tyson in
And
by
no, I don't want Joe
proxy.
Rogan to be the referee. Yep.
That'd be pretty funny. Yeah, so let's say next week we're going to talk about some of the stuff
Mm,
Iran's been up to because that'll sort of wrap in Hamas. That'll sort of wrap in
yeah. Why
Venezuela. I
not?
think that'll be a good
It's a good
one.
time.
All right, so we're shorter than we usually are, longer than I thought I'd be, but this one went off pretty good. And since we're adults, Pete, instead of abruptly cutting off the podcast anymore, uh, we're going to say thanks for
Thank you, guys.
listening.
We wouldn't
And
be here without
and
you.
if you haven't already, please give us a follow on Spotify or subscribe wherever your podcast vendor is getting you connected with us. Please do leave us a 5-star review. Don't hesitate to reach
Yeah,
out with a
it really
comment.
helps the program.
Link Instagram is probably the best way to reach us right now at Brass
Yeah,
Tactcast.
we'll do a mailbox too if you send us messages like letters to the editor. We'll open them up and read them and get some shout outs.
Absolutely will. But yeah, so if you liked what we're doing, please just raise awareness, spread the love. We're just out here trying to help people who don't otherwise feel like they could be informed about foreign policy or feel like they're not smart enough to be involved in foreign policy. We just want to give you all the tools to make your informed decision as a voter and have your voice heard and have your presence felt in our foreign
Yeah.
policy. So again, thanks for listening. Hope to hear from you. Leave us a 5-star review. Catch you next week where we talk about the Iran
Iran shenanigans.
shenanigans.
I love it.
Iran shenanigans. There we go. Next episode.
Bye.
Iran shenanigans. Thanks for listening.